Everything you know about the Wild West was made up by a tubercular dentist, a lying ex-soldier, and a bunch of screenwriters who never rode a horse. In the next few minutes, I'm gonna show you how 25 lies turned into truth in everyone's mind, who came up with each one, and most importantly, who profited from it. Number 1. The hat you see in John Wayne movies, with curled brims and a high crown, didn't exist in the real Wild West. That look was created by Buffalo Bill's show in the late 1880s to impress audiences on the East Coast. Before that, the original Stetson, called the Boss of the Plains, was a straight hat with no curve at all, kind of like a fancy bucket. And here's the funniest part. When John B. Stetson launched that hat in '85, most cowboys didn't even care. They wore whatever they already had: wool caps, straw hats, anything cheap that could handle the sun. The Stetson only became a symbol of the West after marketing got involved. Catalogs and ads sold the idea that every real cowboy wore one. Hollywood bought that idea and turned it into an icon. The Stetson didn't dress the West. Marketing dressed the Stetson. Number 2. Bearded cowboys. In movies, every cowboy looks like he just walked out of a barber shop. Clean-shaven face, hair in place, like he had a personal barber riding along on the trail. But reality was very different. In 1870, a haircut from a barber cost about half a day's wages for an average ranch hand. Not the kind of money anyone threw away easily. And out on the range, clean water was for drinking and keeping the horses alive, not for working up shaving lather. A shaved face was for city people, for those who had the time and access. After weeks driving cattle under the sun and through the dust, the cowboy came into town looking half wild. And the first stop was almost always the barber. Not out of vanity. It was just that no saloon, and much less the brothels, welcomed a man who smelled like 3 weeks on the trail and cattle. Number 3. White cowboys. Think about the words every cowboy used: lasso, rodeo, bronco, corral, ranch. All of that comes from Spanish. The American cowboy didn't invent any of it. He learned it from Mexican vaqueros, who had been herding cattle for generations before the Anglo-Saxons arrived in Texas. But the story goes further. After the Civil War, thousands of freed black people needed work, and the cattle trails didn't ask your color, only whether you could handle the journey. Historians estimate that 1 out of every 4 cowboys was black or Mexican. There were also native people who knew every inch of that land, and Chinese immigrants who left the railroads to try their luck on the ranches. The real Old West spoke at least 4 languages in the same camp. Hollywood decided one was enough and painted everyone the same color. Number 4. Beans, hard biscuits, and black coffee. That was a real cowboy's dinner, and lunch, and breakfast too. Fresh meat was a luxury. Vegetables were rare. Milk? Forget it. Without decent nutrition, the body paid the price. Most cowboys were around 5'6", weighed about 140 pounds, and aged fast. A 30-year-old man already looked 45. Rotten teeth, sunburned skin, a crooked back from so much riding. Now compare that to the cowboy Hollywood sold you, John Wayne, at 6'4". Broad shoulders, square jaw, custom-fit vest. The actor had a dentist, a personal trainer, and a costume designer. The real cowboy had reheated beans and the sun in his face 12 hours a day. The frontier never fed the body the screen made up. Number 5. It may sound crazy, but the most dangerous towns in the Old West had strict rules against carrying guns. Dodge City, Tombstone, Abilene, they all required cowboys to hand over their revolvers to the sheriff or leave them at the hotel when they arrived. Signs at the edge of town made that crystal clear. And here's the part nobody tells you. The most famous shootout in American history. The gunfight at the OK Corral in 1881 started exactly because the Clantons and McClorys refused to turn in their weapons like the local law required. Wyatt Earp and his brothers went there to enforce that city ordinance. 30 shots in 30 seconds, 3 dead, all because of a gun control law that someone decided to ignore. The Wild West was a whole lot less armed than Hollywood wants you to believe. Number 6. Think about this. A cowboy was more likely to die on the job than a police officer is today. But it wasn't because of some noon duel shootout. It was from drowning while crossing a river, falling off a horse, getting struck by lightning out in the open, or being caught in a stampede in the middle of the night. Death in the Old West was common and came with no soundtrack at all. The real danger didn't come from some outlaw in a black hat. It came from a river rising without warning at 3 in the morning while the whole camp was asleep. Movies show cowboys facing outlaws, but in real life their biggest enemy was nature itself. Working cattle out in the open meant being exposed to all of that, day after day, with no hospital nearby, no quick rescue, nothing. It was brutal work that few could handle for more than a few seasons. Number 7. You grew up seeing the cowboy and his horse as inseparable partners, almost like two souls tied together. Reality was very different. A working horse in the Old West lasted about 5 to 7 years under heavy use before being replaced or retired. Most of them didn't even have real names. They were the chestnut, the spotted one, the one with the bad leg. A ranch hand swapped horses the same way he swapped out a broken tool. That epic bond between man and horse did exist sometimes, but it was more the kind of thing you'd see with a wealthy army officer riding a purebred horse, not a cowboy on a Mustang borrowed from the ranch. Out there, the animal wasn't a companion. It was equipment. And when it stopped doing the job, it got replaced without much ceremony. Number 8. Cowboys versus Native Americans. Hollywood sold the idea of cowboys and Native Americans in a direct face-off, like it was a war between equals. But the real timeline tells a different story. The ones fighting the indigenous nations were the United States Army, carrying out organized campaigns of forced removal. The cowboy only showed up later, when the land had already been cleared for cattle ranching. In practice, a lot of cowboys worked on grazing land that had belonged to entire tribes just weeks earlier. And there's more. In many regions, cowboys and native people lived side by side, negotiated herd passage, and traded information about water sources. The conflict was real, nobody denies that. But the version of two sides facing each other hides an important detail. One side had already lost before the other one even arrived. Number 9. Dodge City, 1888, considered the most dangerous town in the West. Do you know how many homicides were recorded in its worst year? 5. Just 5. New York in the same decade had a much higher per capita murder rate. The truth is, the Old West was dangerous, yes, but not for the reason Hollywood sold. What killed the most people wasn't revolver bullets. It was cholera, dysentery, hunger, and the brutal isolation of living hundreds of miles from the nearest doctor. The cattle towns needed order to function. Without law, there was no business, no railroad stopping there, no future. That's why towns like Dodge and Abilene hired marshals and made rules fast. The Wild West existed, but it lasted a lot less time than people imagine. Number 10. Think about it. If you want to kill someone, why the hell would you announce the time and place, giving the guy time to get armed? It makes no sense at all. And that's exactly why high noon duels almost never really happened. In the real Old West, if someone wanted to get rid of an enemy, he shot him in the back in a crowded saloon or set up an ambush on a dark road. No warning, no audience, no honor at all. The idea of the fair duel came from European codes of honor, which were already rare even in Europe itself. Hollywood picked noon for one simple reason. The overhead sun got rid of shadows and made filming easier. The time of the duel didn't come from Western tradition. It came from what the cameraman needed. Reality was dirty, cowardly, and full of no rules. Very different from those dramatic countdowns we grew up watching. Number 11, 30 seconds. The most famous shootout in the Old West lasted less than a TV commercial. 30 shots fired from less than 6 feet away. 3 men dead. No dramatic music, no slow motion, no one-liners. In real life, it was fast, chaotic, and brutal. But what really caused all of it had nothing cinematic about it. It was the result of months of political fighting over control of Tombstone. On one side were the Earps, tied to the local Republican Party. On the other were the Clantons and the McClorys, connected to the county Democrats. The dispute involved licenses, taxes, and power over who ran the town. The famous clash on October 26, 1881, was the breaking point of a political war disguised as a rivalry between cowboys and lawmen. Hollywood turned it into an epic duel. The truth was a lot more ordinary. Number 12. Try holding your arms straight out for 30 seconds without shaking. Hard, right? Now imagine doing that after riding all day under the sun, covered in dust, heart pounding, and holding a Colt Peacemaker that weighed almost 3 pounds. In the movies, cowboys made impossible shots from a moving horse. In real life, that revolver's effective range was about 25 yards under perfect conditions, and perfect conditions did not include a guy shaking in the middle of a shootout. Police reports from towns like Dodge City and Tombstone show something Hollywood will never admit. Most shots fired in real gunfights simply missed the target. Famous gunmen were not necessarily the most accurate. They were the ones who stayed calm while the other guy panicked. Number 13. In the movies, every night at the saloon ends with chairs flying and bottles breaking. But think about it. A bar mirror cost more than a cowboy's monthly pay. It came in by train from back east, and any crack during shipping meant a total loss. A piano, when there was one, was worth more than several horses put together. The saloon owner was not some movie extra. He was a businessman who treated every glass like an investment. Every chair represented days of profit. Nobody let that stuff get destroyed without consequences. Fights happened, sure, but saloon owners hired armed security and kept firm rules. Many required guns to be left at the door. Reality looked a lot more like a regular bar than a war zone. Hollywood needed action. The saloon owner needed the business to keep running. Number 14. You think every sheriff in the Old West was either a hero or a villain. The truth is more complicated. The guy made between $50 and $100 a month, less than a good carpenter back then. And he still had to pay for ammunition, feed his horse, and sometimes even cover out of his own pocket the people helping keep order. A lot of towns went months without anyone wanting the job. Now imagine that, a badly paid man, alone, armed, surrounded by ranchers and saloon owners, with more money than he would ever see. When corruption happened, it wasn't because of evil, it was math. What's really impressive is how many of those men chose to stay honest anyway. Hollywood never told that side of the story. Number 15. In San Francisco in 1856, the Vigilance Committee took just 2 weeks to go from a group of concerned citizens to a parallel court with the power to execute. 2 weeks. That's how long it takes for a group to get used to unlimited power. And that pattern repeated itself in dozens of towns across the West. It always started the same way. Let's protect our community. Then it turned into let's decide who's guilty. and it ended with "let's hang the people we don't like." Movies show vigilantes as reluctant heroes doing what the law wouldn't do. The reality is that most of those groups had their own interests: land, business, political power. And the worst part? The vigilante never saw himself as the villain. He thought he was delivering justice. That's the detail nobody tells you. Number 16. You think the gold rush made prospectors rich? Think again. Most of them went home broke. The people who really made money were the guys selling shovels, boots, and supplies. Samuel Brannan is the perfect example. Before running through the streets of San Francisco in 1848 shouting, "Gold! Gold!" he bought up the entire stock of shovels and buckets in the area. When the rush started, he was already set to sell everything at a huge profit. Levi Strauss was another one. He didn't go to California to dig for anything. He went to sell durable pants to the workers. The result? He became one of the best-known brands on the planet. The myth says the prospector was the hero of the story. The reality is that the merchants were the ones who really made fortunes, selling the dream along with the tools. Number 17. In the movies, everyone rides across the country on horseback, like they're just going around the block. Reality was very different. A stagecoach trip from St. Louis to San Francisco took about 25 days, cost the equivalent of months of wages for an average worker, and the comfort level was zero. You slept sitting up, swallowed dust all day, and hoped an axle wouldn't break in the middle of the desert. When the Transcontinental Railroad was completed in 1869 at Promontory Summit, Utah, everything changed. The same trip dropped to less than a week. The horse didn't disappear, but it became local transportation, like going from your house to the nearest town. The West's real revolution wasn't the saddle, it was the rail, and most ordinary people never crossed the country on horseback. They took the train. Number 18. You know that dry tumbleweed rolling down an empty street in every Western movie? Yeah, it's not even American. Russian thistle showed up by accident in the 1870s, probably mixed in with shipments of flaxseed from Russia. In less than 20 years, it had spread across pretty much the entire Great Plains. And here's the detail that surprises everybody. A single plant can release up to 290,000 seeds in one season. Farmers hated that stuff. It piled up against fences, competed with grazing land, dried out, and turned into a fire hazard. They tried everything to control it, and nothing worked. Then Hollywood came along and turned that pest into one of the most famous images of the West. The biggest symbol of the American Western is actually an unwanted immigrant that nobody ever managed to get rid of. Number 19. In 1869, Wyoming did something that shocked the entire country. It gave women the right to vote. That happened 51 years before the 19th Amendment guaranteed that right to the rest of the nation. But it wasn't because of progressive ideals. The territory was almost empty and desperately needed families to settle there. The vote was basically a way to attract women, and it worked. But the effect went way beyond what anyone expected. While the eastern states were still arguing over whether women should have a voice in politics, the West already had women serving as justices of the peace, running farms on their own, and driving stagecoaches on dangerous routes. Life on the frontier opened doors that tradition kept locked in the rest of the country. It wasn't kindness, it was survival, and they proved they deserved every opportunity. Number 20. Movies show outlaws robbing trains and riding off rich. Reality was very different. Most train robberies ended in total disaster. Safes had time locks that even the engineer couldn't open. A lot of trains carried armed Pinkerton guards just waiting for someone to try their luck. Passengers were often armed too and had no problem shooting back. Butch Cassidy became famous not because he was especially good at it, but because he stayed alive long enough to become a legend. For every robbery that worked, dozens ended in prison, a pathetic getaway, or death in a shootout with security guards who were already prepared. The railroads invested heavily in protection because they were transporting gold and payroll. Crime just wasn't worth it. Number 21. Have you ever stopped to think about why the good guy always wears a white hat? It wasn't an artistic choice, it was improvisation. In the 1920s, silent movies had no dialogue at all, no spoken lines, not enough title cards, so the director needed the audience to instantly know who the hero was and who the villain was. The cheapest and fastest fix: a light-colored hat for the good guy, a dark hat for the bad guy. It was just a visual trick to solve a technical problem. But then sound came to movies in the 1930s, and nobody dropped the trick. Color came in the 1950s, and by then the trick had already turned into tradition. Whole generations grew up linking white with good and black with evil, without ever questioning where that came from. A cheap improvisation from a century ago still shapes how Hollywood tells good versus evil stories today. Number 22. Hollywood sold the idea that Native Americans were nothing but fierce warriors attacking wagon trains. Reality is very different. The Comanche controlled trade routes that stretched from Mexico to Canada, trading horses, hides, and weapons with dozens of different peoples. The Haudenosaunee, known as the Iroquois, maintained a political confederacy so organized that some historians believe it influenced the U.S. Constitution itself. Benjamin Franklin even studied that system. Calling these people savages is like calling ancient Greece a bunch of fighters. Yes, there were wars, but reducing everything to that means ignoring entire civilizations that had laws, alliances, and complex economies long before Europeans arrived. Number 23. Let's talk numbers because they don't lie. An average cattle drive had between 2,000 and 3,000 head of cattle. To move all that for hundreds of miles, you needed at least 10 to 12 cowboys, a cook with his chuck wagon, a wrangler taking care of 50 to 80 extra horses, and a trail boss who knew every river and every water stop along the way. Without that crew, the cattle just wouldn't make it to their destination. Now think about that lone cowboy in the movies, driving the herd by himself into the sunset. In real life, he'd lose half the herd on the first night. The truth is, the Old West ran on teamwork, not individual heroics. Number 24. Everybody has heard that Jesse James was some kind of American Robin Hood, robbing from the rich to give to the poor. Nice story, but the people inside those trains told a very different version. The passengers were not top-hatted bankers. They were workers, immigrants, families carrying everything they had in their pockets. Jesse and his gang went seat by seat, taking watches, money, and anything else of value. Nobody asked those people what happened. Newspapers preferred telling the outlaw version because it sold more copies. And here's the detail nobody mentions. A good chunk of the stolen money stayed with the gang itself. There is no record of Jesse handing anything out to anyone. When you look at it from the side of the people staring down the barrel of a gun, the folk hero turns into what he always was. An armed thief, taking from people who couldn't defend themselves. Number 25. Here's the fact that changes everything. The entire Old West, from start to finish, lasted only 25 years. From 1865, when the Civil War ended, to 1890, when historian Frederick Jackson Turner declared that the American frontier had closed. That's it. A soldier who came back from the war at 20 years old was 45 when that era was over. Less than a full career. And in this video, you saw 25 myths, one for each year, the Wild West really existed. Everything that came after, the The thousands of movies, books, TV shows, and games was built on just 2.5 decades, lived by ordinary people who never dreamed of becoming legends. Maybe the biggest myth about the Old West is this, that it was big. It wasn't. But the stories we tell about it are bigger than any frontier that ever existed.